Well, welcome everyone to you and your Iowa civil rights. We are recording the session.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to say a few moments to give a thank you to our event sponsors, the City of Decorah, the Decorah Chamber of Commerce, Decorah Human Rights Commission, Decorah's United Church of Christ, Story People, and the B&B on Broadway. And I didn't mention, I am the chair, I'm Melissa Cook, and the chair of the Human Rights Commission. Who you're here to hear tonight from is actually Liz Johnson. She's the executive director of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Liz leads a team of dedicated individuals working towards Iowa Civil Rights Commission's mission of ending discrimination in Iowa. She was appointed to this position by the governor in August of 2019. And prior to her appointment at the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, Liz has held many very important roles in Iowa as an attorney and as a civil rights specialist. She has a BA in art history from Clerk College University and a JD from the University of Iowa College of Law. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here tonight with everyone who's here and on video in perpetuity with everyone who will watch this. I'm excited to share just some background on the commission, on what we do, and then really some background on your civil rights protections under the Iowa Civil Rights Act. Slide. I like to start off with just a few brief ground rules for any discussion, just so we're all on the same page. Slide. First, listen thoughtfully. I'd ask you to bring an open mind to this. Leave any preconceived notions, listen critically, and consider everything that you hear. Slide. Second, type your questions in or raise your hand. I think that's a thing that you can do here in the Zoom universe. And I can just kind of take questions as we go. If you are viewing this after this has been recorded and you have questions, feel free to email the commission, look us up on the fancy internet, and email us or give us a call, and I'm happy to field any questions after the fact. And slide. And then finally, we're here to learn from one another. So don't tune out other people's questions, don't tune out other people's stories and experiences. Everything that everybody has to say always brings value in these situations. Slide. So who are we? Who is the Iowa Civil Rights Commission? Here's our organization chart. We are an executive branch agency under Governor Reynolds. Chapter 216 of the Iowa Code establishes us, the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. We are funded in part through the Iowa General Fund. We're funded in part through grants through the EEOC and HUD based on the work that we do investigating employment discrimination complaints and housing discrimination complaints. Additionally, you in the city of Decorah have a local commission. Chapter 216.19 subsection 2 mandates that any city with a population of 29,000 citizens or more has to maintain a local commission. Now the local commission can take on whatever role it feels is appropriate. Some local commissions have vast staffs. They investigate complaints. They take on advocacy roles in the community. Some local commissions take on more of an advisory capacity in the community. It really depends on the local and their relationship to the city government. Slide. So first, most importantly, we have commissioners. We have 7 commissioners right now. The statute allows for between 4 and 7 commissioners. These commissioners are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Iowa Senate. These must be politically diverse appointments, no more than 4 of the same party. And they must provide for geographical representation. Right now we have Sioux City, Sheldon, 2 from Des Moines, Eldridge, Cedar Rapids, and Washington represented. The commissioners do some work for the commission. They preside over administrative appeals. They recommend changes to the administrative code. They can be instrumental in lobbying the legislature for changes to the code. In the 2008 changes to the code, when sexual orientation and gender identity protections were added, the commissioners were absolutely critical in getting those protections added. Additionally, the commissioners are really the voice of the commission throughout the state. They get involved in their communities and then can report back to the commission the things that they're hearing and experiencing. And then we can in turn echo out our message through the commissioners to the state of Iowa. Slide. Then we have the staff who work in this lovely, lovely Grimes office building. You can't see the windows because they're hidden. Slide. We have 3 supervisors. Slide. There's myself, there's Charles Hill, and there's Caitlin Smith. I take on the role of the housing supervisor. I take on all the relationships with the local commissions. I oversee the work of the commission as a whole. I do the budget. I do all the fun administrative stuff. Charles is our non-housing supervisor, so he deals with employment, public accommodations, education, credit, and retaliation complaints. And then Caitlin's our administrative supervisor. She oversees all of kind of the paperwork that gets the job done, and then she oversees our mediation unit as well. Slide. Next, we have Assistant Attorney General Katie Fiola. Katie makes sure we're all doing what is required by the law, which is very important. Katie does all of our litigation here at the commission, both in administrative hearings and in district and appellate court proceedings. She gives legal advice on a daily basis and does legal advising on an informal basis for our screeners and investigators as they're working on their cases. And it's really helpful to have her as a working part of the office so that we don't just kind of operate in this vacuum of what we're thinking without that kind of more advanced legal opinion. Slide. Next, we have 18 civil rights specialists. Now, these fall into 3 groups. We have non-housing screeners, non-housing investigators, and housing investigators. Now, in those 3 groups, they also take on the roles of mediators and conciliators. There's a compliance monitor, and then these people also do the bulk of the outreach and education work. So most presentations like this are given by our civil rights specialists. Most of the outreach we do at events across Iowa are done by the civil rights specialists. All the civil rights specialists are attorneys. They all have legal educations, and they produce legal product for the commission. Slide. Finally, we have 4 administrative personnel. These are the people that really get the incredible job done of handling all of the paperwork that the commission gets in on an annual basis. They do the complaint processing, which includes jurisdictional review, docketing, communicating with parties, mailing and receiving questionnaires and responses, communicating with the EEOC and HUD, and then closing cases and dealing with all of that paperwork on that end once a case is complete. Also, we have a mediation coordinator that deals with scheduling our mediations and making all of those happen. Slide. So I told you who we are. Now I'm going to tell you what we do. Slide. So the mission of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission is simple: to end discrimination within the state of Iowa. We are a law enforcement agency. We enforce the Iowa Civil Rights Act. As a law enforcement agency, it is paramount that above all things, we remain neutral in civil rights matters. You won't ever see us taking on an advocacy role. We may, when there's legislation, take a pro stance if it's something that is supported by the governor and the rest of the state, to indicate our support along with the rest of the state for something that the governor feels is important. But we won't be advocating for anything because we don't believe that's our role, because we will often be dealing with both sides of any issue as the people who process complaints alleging discrimination. Slide. So we do kind of three main responsibilities. Slide. First, we effectively enforce the Civil Rights Act through processing complaints alleging discrimination. Now, the roles that I talked about, screening, investigating, mediating, jurisdictional reviews, questionnaires, all of those things go into processing complaints alleging discrimination. And I'll kind of walk you through at the end of the presentation what that looks like. It's sort of the how a bill becomes a law, but with a complaint. Slide. Second, we provide conflict resolution services for civil rights matters through mediation and conciliation. So we provide an opportunity. You can come in. Thank you. So we provide an opportunity for people to get their civil rights issues resolved without having to take them to court. Slide. Finally, we provide training and education to the public. We are the civil rights agency for the state of Iowa, and we should be the agency that promotes civil rights, that promotes equality to the citizens of Iowa, and that does education to the citizens on all issues to do with civil rights. Slide. So we prohibit discrimination in 5 areas. And Melissa, you can just go ahead and click through these because it's a rapid. Employment, housing, public accommodation, education, and credit. Those are the 5 areas that the Civil Rights Act covers. Slide. Now, as you can see by this graph from our 2019 annual report, those 5 areas are not equally represented in the complaints that we get. The bulk of the complaints that we get in the door are employment discrimination complaints. That's a solid 80% of the complaints that are filed with our agency. Another probably 16% of the complaints are housing and public accommodation complaints. So those are either dealing with housing or dealing with public accommodation, which is being out in the world, interacting with businesses and interacting with the government. And then the rest, the small, very small portion of complaints come in about education and come in about credit. And my theory on this is not that discrimination isn't an issue in education and in credit, but that there are other avenues that are provided for in statutes that people can bring their complaints through. In education, there are so many avenues through the Department of Education here in Iowa that you can bring issues with schools, with teachers to the department to try to get resolved. And it's rare that a situation comes to us, and often when a situation comes to us, it's only at the end of a long battle with the school. Slide. So what can you file a complaint about? What is a reason someone can discriminate against you? Slide. So there are a number of reasons under the statute: age, color, creed, familial status, gender identity, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race, religion, retaliation, sex, and sexual orientation. Now, the ones with asterisks next to them are not protected classes in every category. Age is only a protected class in employment and in credit. And you know this because you can see there are senior centers. There is senior housing. You can have segregated housing for older individuals, and that's okay under the law. Familial status is only a protected class in housing and in credit. Marital status is only a protected class in credit, not a protected class anywhere else. Though I think marital status kind of gets brought in under sex when you talk about things like employment discrimination and public accommodation discrimination, when you're talking about maybe harassment issues and people making comments to somebody and people making assumptions about someone's status. I think there's some of that marital status that sort of gets snuck in there. And then mental disability is The only place it is not a protected class is in credit. In credit, you can discriminate based on someone's mental disability in terms of their capacity to understand the credit that you're extending, that you're going to make that relationship with someone. Slide. So this is data over the past 5 fiscal years. And you can see kind of how it fluctuates every year slightly based on basis. So surprisingly, we get the most complaints because of retaliation. More than anything else, people come to us and say, I think I've been retaliated against because I complained about discrimination. Almost always that retaliation complaint comes in with something else. Like, I was discriminated against based on my race, and then when I complained about it, they retaliated against me. Or I was discriminated against based on my religion, and then I complained, and then they retaliated against me. So retaliation can kind of partner with any of these other protected classes. Slide. Then in housing, it's a little different. We have far and away the most complaints based on disability. And as we will talk about in a little bit, a significant portion of these complaints are about assistance animals, which is an emerging area of housing law, which we can't seem to stop talking about because it is ever changing. With every new complaint, I feel like it gets further honed and further sculpted, and it's definitely moving faster than we can get court cases down from anywhere to give us permanent law. So we're just sort of going case by case, molding the law. And then after disability, it looks like race and then retaliation are kind of the big three for reasons for filing housing complaints. Slide. So I want to give just a little bit of background about why your civil rights matter. And I always like to start and give kind of the big three cases from Iowa. What I see are the big three cases from Iowa about civil rights, your big three historic cases on civil rights. Slide. And the first case is Clerk v. Board of Directors. This is an 1868 case. And what most people don't know is that in 1868, the Iowa Supreme Court said you cannot have segregated schools in Iowa. Separate is not equal. The Iowa Constitution does not allow for the separation of students based on race. So in 1868, Iowa desegregated schools, well before the United States did it with Brown v. Board of Education. So I think every Iowan should brag about this just a little bit, because we've always been on the forefront. We've always been just a little bit ahead when it comes to our Supreme Court understanding some of these civil rights issues. Slide. The second big case is Koger versus Northwestern Union Packet. Now, this is a public accommodation case. Ms. Koger was a biracial woman who was traveling on a steamboat, and she wanted to eat dinner in the dining room. And she was given a ticket, but the ticket said, I'm going to get the exact words, colored girl written on it. She did not like that ticket. She did not want to sit where that ticket was going to make her sit. So she had a white man go and get her a ticket. And she took his ticket and she went to the dining room and demanded to be sat where he was going to be sat. And the court tells us there was some kicking and screaming involved, and a few choice words were uttered by Ms. Koger, and she was forcibly removed from the dining room. And the court does have some rather antiquated commentary on the behavior of a woman in such a way, but they do say They come down on her side when it comes to using that ticket. They say, you cannot make her sit somewhere different than that white man because her money is worth the same as his money. She gets to eat the same meal that he eats. She gets access to all the facilities that he gets access to. The court said biracial passengers and white passengers must have the same rights because of equality of all before the law. Slide. Now the third case, this is known, it's getting known more in Des Moines, which makes me happy, but it's still not known nearly as well as I wish it was. And this is Dear Ms. Edna Griffin, who is sort of Des Moines' own Rosa Parks. Edna Griffin in the 1940s and two friends of hers led sit-ins at Katz Drugstore. Because Katz Drugstore said, you can come around back to the kitchen door and get your food to go, but you cannot sit at the drugstore counter. You cannot be served up there. That is for the white people only. The exact words of the proprietors of Katz Drugstore were, we do not have the equipment to serve you, Ms. Griffin. We do not have the equipment to serve you. As though it takes some sort of special equipment to serve her because of her race. And so in this time, they brought criminal charges against Mr. Katz and Katz Drugstore because this was a violation of the law to deprive someone of equal access to a public accommodation. And the court said, absolutely, he broke the law when he refused to serve Ms. Griffin and her friends. The Iowa Supreme Court held that they broke the law when they refused to serve them because of the color of their skin. The law said that Katz Drugstore could not deny service to anyone because of their race. So this more or less encouraged Mr. Katz to go out of business, but there is now a plaque. The building is now renamed the Edna Griffin Building in downtown Des Moines. There's a plaque. There was supposed to be a beautiful dedication to this building in April, which sadly got postponed, I believe indefinitely due to COVID-19. But I'm just so happy that Des Moines is celebrating this woman and celebrating this rich history that we have right here. And the bravery that she had standing up for something that she knew was wrong. Slide. So then there's the United States, who eventually caught up to Iowa and went through its own civil rights movement. No, I joke. But the United States went through major civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. The three key pieces of legislation that emerged from that movement were the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The end of the civil rights movement is considered the April 4th, 1968 assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King by James Earl Ray. But as we know, the work was not completed. The work was far from completed. Slide. Now, the 1970s and 1980s are not necessarily known as civil rights decades, but the work for civil rights didn't stop then. Disability rights advocates continued to push forward, fighting for inclusion in society and equal access to public accommodations and employment opportunities and schools. This eventually culminated in the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, authored by Iowa's own Tom Harkin. Harkin famously delivered part of his introduction speech in sign language, saying it was so his deaf brother could understand. And we now have the Harkin Center on Disabilities, Disability Law and Policy. I'm not sure the exact wording, connected with Drake University, and they do just a wonderful work for promoting disability rights, for promoting inclusion, and doing a lot of that research, which is so important. Also during this time, sexual harassment lawsuits were gaining prominence as more and more courts began recognizing and providing remedies for the hostile work environments that women were forced to endure. I think we can all remember, or most of us can remember, the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas trials on television. I remember being home sick from school, and I was maybe 8 years old, and I don't remember understanding it, but I remember it was happening. Like, it was just everywhere. And it makes me wonder what it was like to be alive and aware and caring about these issues then. I feel like I missed something important because I was too young. I'm sure I missed a lot of things because I was too young, but I just really wonder what it was like to watch all of that happening. Slide. So then we have contemporary civil rights movements because the work is still not done. On the left, we have pro same-sex marriage demonstrations prior to SCOTUS's Obergefell decision, which, as we know, followed Iowa's Varnum v. Breen decision, which made same-sex marriage the law. Thank you, Iowa Supreme Court. On the right, we have demonstrators in 2015 following the deaths of Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and Tamir Rice. The Black Lives Matter movement initially gained traction, kind of lost traction in 2018, then reignited in 2020 after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor. The fight for civil rights is not over. There's still a sizable opportunity gap between whites and people of color in the United States, here in Iowa. Slide. So why do civil rights matter? Why are we talking about any of this? Slide. Because civil rights are what allow you to work where you want to work, live where you want to live, learn where you want, and educate your children where you want, access credit on fair terms, and have access to all the services and benefits of living in a community, regardless of your protected characteristics. Slide. So what is it that the commission does that advances the work of civil rights? Slide. So civil rights enforcement here at the commission provides a remedy to persons who have experienced discrimination. We can't overnight make discrimination go away. We can't live out our mission in a day, but we can, on a case-by-case basis, get remedies for persons who have experienced discrimination, and on a community-by-community basis, provide outreach and education to people to let them know how things should be and how people should be thinking and behaving. Slide. So the remedies that we get for people usually take the form of money. Usually these are somehow quantified into dollars. Slide. If they're settled through a mediation agreement or a conciliation agreement, those allow for some more creative remedies. Often we see things like people requesting a neutral job reference or a letter of apology from someone, or if it was an eviction or something like that, they want something back that the property owner has. There's more that we can do than just get you money. And often when people come to us, they don't want money. That's not the issue. They want the wrong righted. And slide. Settlements with the Iowa Civil Rights Commission always require training. And lately, I feel more and more people have been telling me that's what I care about. That's what I want to see happen. I want them to get training. I want no one to experience what I experienced. I want no one to go through what I had to go through. That training can be with us. It can be on your own, through a private attorney, through a training company. I highly recommend us. We provide good training. Slide. So what are your rights? You have the right to work where you want, but what are your rights? Slide. So you have the right to work free from discrimination. This looks like discriminatory failure to hire and promote claims. People come to us and they say, I didn't get hired from this job because of my protected characteristic. So how am I going to know this? If I'm coming to the commission saying, I didn't get hired because I'm a woman, I'm going to need to be able to say, I know this because XYZ reason. It's not enough that I think it. I'm going to need something that connects me not getting hired with me being a woman. It could be that the employer kept soliciting applications after they rejected me from the position. And I think, well, I'm a woman, I applied. They said no to me, but then they kept asking for applications. Maybe they were just waiting for a man to apply. It could be they told me that they weren't even accepting applications, but then they kept running the advertisement for the job. Well, why would they do that? Why would they do that if they didn't have anything against women? It could be that I know that they hired somebody outside my protected class. I applied, I'm a woman, I got rejected, and they hired a man. And it could be that somebody made biased or questionable statements to me when I applied. Somebody said, like, do you really think you can do this kind of work? This is a dirty job. Do you think this kind of work is for you? Would you be okay with all of these hours away from home? What would your husband think of this job? We're always looking for that, any little thing that you can tell us that connects your protected basis to the bad thing that happened. That's what's going to get your complaint in the door. Slide. On the flip side to the discriminatory failure to hire is discriminatory workplace discipline or termination. So this is going to look like maybe the employer didn't follow the policy when they wrote me up. Maybe the policy is you get 5 tardies before you get a write-up. Well, I was only late to work 3 times and they wrote me up. This may look like they didn't write up other people who did the same thing, and the other people are outside my protected class. So they don't write up the guys, they just write up the girl. Why is that? This may look like the employer having a long pattern of doing this same thing to other women. So really, you've got a lot of different options when you're looking at ways for how to prove that you've been discriminated against. And to get your complaint in the door, you don't have to prove much of anything. You just need that little kind of, we call it a scintilla of evidence. Just something, just a little something that says, I think this is why. I think it's because I'm a woman. Slide. Next, you have the right to work free from harassment. Everyone has the right to work in a harassment-free work environment. So what is harassment? Well, to prove a harassment claim, you have to prove that you have been subjected to unwelcome conduct. So this is conduct that you did not want to have happen to you. The way you're going to show you didn't want to have it happen to you, you're going to complain about it. Most courts are going to make a person complain in order to show that it wasn't welcome. It's going to need to be conduct that's based on a protected class. So it can't just be harassment because they didn't like me, or harassment because they thought I wasn't good at my job. It's going to need to be harassment because I'm a woman, or harassment because of my religion, or harassment because of my protected class. Next, it's going to need to be conduct that's severe or pervasive. So it's conduct that's either really, really bad or conduct that happens all the time, or somewhere kind of along that scale. So if it's not as bad, maybe it needs to happen a little bit more. If it happens all the time, it doesn't need to be very bad at all. But the less it happens, the worse it needs to be. It's kind of that inverse relationship. And then it needs to be conduct that the employer failed to take prompt remedial action to stop. So if you experienced unwelcome conduct based on your protected characteristic that was severe, and you told your employer and they immediately fired the person that did it to you, that is wonderful. That is exactly what we want to see. And that is likely not going to be a super successful civil rights complaint, because that is exactly the kind of thing that we want employers to be doing. We want them to be taking swift action based on the complaints that they receive. Slide. Finally, you have the right to receive an accommodation for a disability. Now, accommodations for disabilities at work can happen anytime. You have the right to an accommodation during the job application process. You have the right to an accommodation your first day at work. You have a right to an accommodation during your 20th year at work. Anywhere in there, you always have the right to a reasonable accommodation for a disability. In order to get this, you must show that you have a disability. Your employer has to know about it. They can't be expected to accommodate something they don't know about. You have to be qualified for your job, either with or without your accommodation. And you have to ask for it. This is, sometimes people fail to ask for what they want. And then they come to us and they say, I didn't get what I wanted. Well, you didn't ask for it. Your employer can't be expected and can't be held liable for not giving you something that you didn't ask them for. Accommodations can look like a variety of things. They can be mobility devices. They can be additional breaks. They can be flexibility in your schedule. They can be a shift restriction if you have sleeping issues. They can be permission to allow your service animal on your production floor. Slide. Next category is housing. Know your rights at home. Slide. So you have the right to live where you want to live, regardless of your protected characteristics. This does not mean that you can knock on somebody's door and say, I want to live in your house. But this means that if there is a house for sale or an apartment for rent and you are otherwise qualified to buy or rent that place, you cannot be rejected because of your protected characteristic. Slide. The first type of housing complaint, refusal to rent or refusal to sell. This is pretty simple. I wanted to rent this apartment. They wouldn't let me. I think it's because of my sex. I think it's because of my age. I'm sorry, not age. I think it's because of my religion. I think it's because this property management company knows me because I complained about them last year. I think they're retaliating against me and they won't rent to me now. Slide. Housing has interesting types of discrimination called steering and blockbusting. Steering is pretty well known. That's when you're guiding prospective buyers or renters either toward or away from certain neighborhoods based on race. This type of behavior maintains and reinforces historic segregation and keeps our neighborhoods separated, which is not what we are trying to do. Blockbusting isn't really done anymore but it was a historic practice. And the way that it would work is that real estate agents and building developers would come into a white neighborhood, and they would convince white homeowners to sell their homes at low prices for fear of minorities moving into the neighborhood. They would then turn around and sell those properties for high prices to Black families who were trying to escape inner city neighborhoods and wanted to get into neighborhoods like that. So they would effectively push white people out of the neighborhood they were in order to make a new kind of segregated neighborhood for Black people. That's blockbusting. Slide. Third, adverse terms and conditions. This is often seen in rentals, in apartment complexes. Anything you can think of that's part of your housing can be the basis of a complaint. A write-up or a citation from your landlord or property manager for failing to remove your trash from the hallway or leaving something out on your deck for too long. The timeliness of responding to maintenance requests can be the basis of a complaint. Handling of disputes with other tenants can be the basis of a complaint. Access to the benefits of a property. You can say they don't let me use the building with the gym, or use the building with the pool, or they're always letting other people book the party room and they don't let me book whenever I want to book the party room. They say it's busy, but I know it isn't. Anything like that can be one of those adverse terms and conditions that can be the basis of a housing complaint. Slide. Then finally, there's eviction, or in the housing context, foreclosure. This would be your tenancy or your housing ending in what you believe might be a discriminatory way. Slide. Finally, you have the right to live free from harassment. Now, this is something HUD has made sexual harassment a real priority in the past several years. And they've really, I think they prioritized it because they understand the heightened concern about being sexually harassed where you live, and this sort of the violation both to you as a person who's been sexually harassed, but to your sense of safety and security that you've been sexually harassed at your home. And they've had on some occasions, they've had cases that have been filed with us that have been referred to the Department of Justice for prosecution because of the severity of the harassment that's been involved. Housing also sees quid pro quo sexual harassment complaints. So complaints where a landlord says, you want me to fix your stove? How bad do you want me to fix it? And then makes suggestive eyes and gestures to the bedroom. And these things unfortunately happen to people, and happen to people who are in dire financial circumstances, and happen to people who don't have a lot of other options. And this is thankfully why the housing complaint process is here, because people don't have to put up with that from their landlord. Slide. You have the right to live with an assistance animal. I promised you we would talk about these. So an assistance animal can be a companion animal, an emotional support animal, a therapy animal, a person's service animal. The one important thing to remember, if you take one thing away, is that an assistance animal is not a pet. You can't charge pet rent. You can't call it a pet. You can't put restrictions on it like you can a pet. You can't regulate it like you can a pet. It is not a pet. An assistance animal does something for a person with a disability to assist with the symptom of a disability. It may alert an individual who is deaf. It may provide companionship to a person with depression, or provide emotional support to a PTSD survivor. The only requirements are that a person has a disability and a disability-related need for the assistance animal. Like I said, these are incredibly common complaints that get filed with us because this is a really new area of housing law. And landlords and complainants alike are both still learning about assistance animals and about how all of this works. And just in 2019, in April 2019, I think it was, the commission enacted an official form that landlords can use that has specific information that by law they're allowed to ask for from a tenant that the tenant can take to their doctor to try to make the process as clear and as painless as possible for everyone involved. So that way the landlord doesn't ask too many questions and risk violating the law, and the tenant feels comfortable, and that way the assistance animal can enter the property with as few issues as possible. Slide. Next are public accommodations. Public accommodations are basically everywhere you go. It's every private business that you interact with, nearly, and every place that offers something for free if it gets government assistance. Slide. You have the right to receive service wherever you go. Notably, you have the right to receive service wherever you go, regardless of your protected characteristics. Businesses can still impose certain restrictions without violating civil rights laws. They can ask you to wear a mask during a pandemic. They can require you to wear shirt and shoes. They can refuse to seat a large group without a reservation on a Friday night. They can impose restrictions. They just can't impose restrictions based on protected characteristics. Slide. You have the right to service that is not markedly hostile. And we see this Fashion Bug store here. And we see the Fashion Bug store because the Fashion Bug case is the case in Iowa about public accommodation discrimination. There was Ms. Kurt, an African-American woman who entered the Fashion Bug. She was there about 15 minutes with her young daughter. Her young daughter was making a mess, running around. She left. Saleswoman comes around after her and notices a couple broken hangers and a beeper tag on the floor. Immediately suspects her of shoplifting. Mentions something to the store manager. Next day, Ms. Kurt comes in, this time instead of with her daughter, with her boyfriend. They're looking around. The saleswoman immediately approaches them. She starts following them around, asking them questions. Then she gets up in Ms. Kurt's face. She starts screaming at her. She threatens to call the police if she doesn't leave immediately. Now, Ms. Kurt has done nothing. Ms. Kurt is attempting to shop at the store. The saleswoman has no proof that Ms. Kurt shoplifted or that Ms. Kurt did anything wrong. But she is screaming at this woman. Store manager immediately runs up, tells sales employee, you need to go away, apologizes to Ms. Kurt, gives her the corporate information to file a complaint, and Ms. Kurt leaves. Leaves, goes home, starts to cry. End of story. Until she files a complaint alleging discrimination. And the court says there's this thing called markedly hostile conduct. So there's the traditional public accommodation discrimination where you get refused service. But then there's markedly hostile conduct where it's not that they refused you service. They let you shop in their store. They let you be there. They let you access the service, but they treated you in such a way that was markedly hostile, that was to the level that it indicated discrimination. Now, interestingly, in the Fashion Bug case, Fashion Bug was not held liable because the store manager immediately ran up, tried to diffuse the situation, and Ms. Kurt, during her deposition, had positive things to say about her, said she remembered her being very nice, she was very helpful. So ultimately, Fashion Bug wasn't held liable, but Fashion Bug gives us the markedly hostile standard that informs most of our public accommodation complaints. Because it's not very often that we see cases where people don't get service at all. It's just that they get service in such a way that they feel like I wasn't really welcome there. That really wasn't a good experience for me. Slide. Next, you have the right to reasonable standards of service from the police. This is something in public accommodations that we see a fair amount of complaints against police departments. Up until the point of arrest, the services of the police are a public accommodation. Once you have been arrested, it is no longer a public accommodation because it is no longer available to the general public. Once you have been arrested, it is a more exclusive service that is only available to those who have been arrested. And then there are different remedies that are available. And here you're looking at, did the police deny you service or were there unusual circumstances? It's similar to that markedly hostile standard. Were there unusual circumstances that indicate discrimination? Slide. Know your rights in education. Slide. And I'm running out of time, but I will cover this. So you have the right to receive an education. The Iowa Civil Rights Act gives every Iowan the right to receive an education regardless of protected characteristics. This is in addition to your rights from the Department of Education, from other state laws, from the Constitution that grants you access to public education here in Iowa. Slide. Education is broadly defined in the Iowa Civil Rights Act, and it includes any academic, extracurricular, research, occupational training, or other program or activity. So the whole realm, basically anything that happens at, before, or after school, that's all in there. So you have the right to receive the full benefits of extracurricular activities. Slide. Finally, you have the right to comparable opportunities in intramural and interscholastic athletics. The Iowa Civil Rights Act allows for sex-separated athletics. And the NCAA has some really good guidance that we have looked at and advised people to look at when it comes to trans athletes participating in athletics, that advises participation for trans athletes based on where they're at with hormone transitions, just to ensure kind of a level playing field with the hormones of the groups involved. And I can, if anybody wants those resources, I'm happy to send those out to people because the NCAA is, I think they're being really proactive on this and they've got some really good information out there. Slide. Finally, know your rights in credit. Slide. You have the right to enter into consumer credit transactions, regardless of your protected characteristics. You have the right to buy a house, buy a car, buy a refrigerator, buy a TV. Any of that, you can't be turned away because of a protected characteristic. Slide. Second, the Civil Rights Act says you have the right to fair finance charges, terms, and conditions based on your economic background, not based on your protected characteristics. Now, this one gets a little tricky for me because I would argue that in some cases, your protected characteristic is intertwined with your economic background. But I think the legislature and I just might have to take that up because I don't see how you can separate those statements in some cases. Slide. So I'm going to pause there because I have 3 minutes left and I cannot get through the complaint process in 3 minutes. I'm going to thank you all for being an attentive audience. I'm going to ask if there are any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I had one. When you were like talking about the like the settlements and stuff, and how you said that there's always training. So like if an organization would receive the training afterward, would they have to pay for that themselves, or is there like resources given them to make that happen? Or
Nope, so typically that's training that they would have to pay for themselves.
okay.
If for some reason the organization came to us and said, we are having trouble affording this training, the commission provides very low cost training and could only provide that.
And that's a good question. So what is the training? Is it like implicit bias training? Is it like, what is it?
So generally it's training that is tailored to the issue that was the subject of the complaint. So if it was a race discrimination and retaliation complaint, then it will be 2 hours of training on civil rights and discrimination with a focus on race discrimination and retaliation.
I had a couple other questions too. I was curious, you talked about the assistance animals with the housing. I was wondering, since it's sort of new here, not so new in California, where I've mostly been, just wondering if it happens with services and accommodations, because that's where I was seeing it a lot.
So assistance animals only exist as assistance animals in housing and then in public accommodations when it comes to like hotel rooms. You can't take your assistance animal to Walmart because it's not a service animal.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. I was thinking of service animals. So that's an important.
No, and it's gray and it's muddy. And the problem is that some assistance animals can be service animals. Like you can have a service dog who is your assistance animal who lives with you and also comes with you to Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can have your service, your assistance animal who is a cat who provides you companionship, and she can't come with you to Walmart.
So you're talking exclusively of all the issues around assistance, not service.
Correct.
Okay, that's important. Yeah. Okay. And I also wondered about the early charts. Those are very interesting. The charts that you had with the,
oh yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if I can go back to them real easily or not. But one of them, I noticed that you separated color versus race. And I was like, what? I didn't understand what that meant.
So we have the Iowa Civil Rights Act prohibits race discrimination and prohibits color discrimination. And we allow people to identify the discrimination that they believe they've experienced. Now, I think the EEOC would tell us that true color discrimination is, I am a dark-skinned Black person, the light-skinned Black people treat me differently than they treat each other because of the color and tone of my skin. But it is quite often that when people file complaints with us and they file based on race, they will also file based on color and just self-identify.
You can tell me where it was.
I think it's after.
After this. There we go. That was interesting. And especially the retaliation is such, yeah, that's where people are filing. And yeah, interesting. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Liz, thanks for your time. We will post this on the human rights page. Melissa and I talked about that. The Human Rights Commission has a page on the city website. So with your permission, we would link the recording there.
Absolutely.
Thank you.